Sorry, Paul. It was a slight change of business, so I'll just move precedence of business that we deal with item 15 at this time. Sorry, there was a second. Thank you, Councillor Fletcher. I'll put that. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. So item 15, and this is a slight departure from our normal process. Just going to invite John and team up. One of the memos that we've got relates to our Auckland Climate Action Plan, and I'm just going to ask for a quick update. This is one that people are really interested in, that we haven't had a lot of visibility over in the last couple of months. So thank you, John. Over to you.
Kia ora koutou, Morena still, barely. So the really light issue of climate change to follow that debate, it's kind of ironic, but I think there's actually some good story here. And also, I just picking up a little bit on the thread of health, I think it's a really good metaphor for how we describe our communities, our infrastructure, and our very democracy, actually, of what we're trying to do through this piece of work. So just 4 or 5 quick things I just wanted to bring you across in maybe 4 or 5 quick minutes. Lots of pretty pictures. Basically, a bit of an overview of what we've done in the last couple of months since we were last with you at a workshop around information, around how we're leveraging Council's leadership, around partnerships and governance, and then how we're aligning events and engagement, just to give you a sense of what's coming in the next couple of months. So you've seen things like this before, and I won't go into great detail, but we are still in the process of digging deep into new evidence, more information, so that you can make better decisions with better information. You saw the information on how Auckland's going to look in about 100 years, or how it may look, different scenarios. And also, we had a workshop around the risks and vulnerabilities. So you know that information is carrying forward. We're doing quite a bit of work, and so is Rimu, who's doing the work with us, to refine that and come back to you at our next workshop. So that's the first thing. I'm going to rapid pace here. The second thing is we had a very productive conversation with ELT about how we leverage our own leadership as an organization and our own climate risks and our own emissions reductions. And so some of those things we're starting down the path of are piloting approach to risk with parks as a start to think about how we do that across the whole organization with Council as a business as well. How we transition existing groups into a really strong and direct look at how we reduce emissions and deal with risks. So there's a group that's being repurposed to do that. And then actually aligning and working with the 60 business CEOs who represent half of New Zealand's GDP, who have committed to climate action in this space. I think there's strong alignment there, even the possibility that we join them. In the partnerships and governance space, this might look familiar because a lot of you were in the room when we discussed this and we workshopped with you. But just to remind you and to inform those who weren't there, there were some key themes that came through. So we had a robust and quite frank and productive session with you all. We look forward to another one in September as well that builds off of this session. We've also done the same thing with local boards. So we've been to nearly all the local boards, all in June. We've seen sort of similar themes come through, but we've tried to capture that. And then I believe as one of the attachments to a memo is a report that we've compiled with the feedback from local boards. We've also had a couple of discussions with the Mana Whenua Kaitiaki Forum and also with the IMSB, separate to this engagement with members. And again, these are some of the themes. We're not going to go down into the depths here, but just showing you that we're reflecting back the themes that have come through. And in fact, some of these themes across this governance are the same. And then finally, you bestowed upon us to create an independent advisory group that's checking and challenging our work through the whole process. We had our first meeting last month. And again, these are the themes. Of course, we had 4 hours with them, and they're experts in this space, so it was a very rich conversation. Of course, these are just the top line items. Moving quickly to the events and engagement side of things, just a couple of things worth highlighting. I don't know if I can actually get this video to go. Hopefully, I might need a little bit of support from the side on that. But we've held a couple, in conjunction with others, some youth events. And there's no video or no audio here, but if we can click on that, you can sort of see, this is a really cool time lapse from our perspective of kids being given the pen saying, what does Auckland 2050 look like to you? that's climate resilient, that is zero carbon, and gets us where we want to go. And again, a lot of those themes that you've been discussing at this committee come through quite clearly in what they've come up with, and we think it's a really nice way of demonstrating the next generation of leadership and their alignment to where we're going as a city. So we've had 4 distinct events that have actually captured some of the thinking of these youth, and we want to keep that as a thread through our engagement. I'll talk about the summit in a second, but moving on to, I'll let the video play out because there's like another 20 seconds. There's the top 10 ideas they came up with. And there we are. I'll talk about the, this other piece of engagement too. You might be aware that we recently launched a website for crowdsourcing of ideas for the plan. And it looks sort of like, well, how do we democratize the design process and go out to people early and say, what do you think should be in this plan? How do you want to be engaged? Maybe even rank your ideas and start iterating with people out in the cloud. And this Climate AKL is the URL, so if you want to call that up on your device at any point, we'd love for you just to know it exists and maybe pass it on to your communities that you represent, because it's a great way for us to get engagement early and to generate some great ideas. And just to give you a sense, early on, it's very big picture stuff. It's not specific to actions, although we will transition it to be a lot more specific. It's what does this look like if we're climate ready for Auckland? How ambitious should we be? What has to change? These are the kind of challenges coming through, and then people can actually take a challenge and throw their ideas out there with a photo, start voting on it, and actually going back and forth with each other. For instance, up here, hey, do you have any thoughts on how we can put this into this particular idea? And then someone responds below, yes, I'll incorporate that. I can't read that, and you probably can't either, but it's an iteration of ideas online that actually feeds into the plan. And of note, I suppose, is we've had some wider engagement from folks like Helen Clark, who have taken notice and essentially personally endorsed the concept for a robust plan and have engaged with the platform. This is my last slide here, but just going back to that summit idea and how we bring it all together, because I think this is a little bit of innovation in how we do things. Of course, there's the evidence building far to the left, but there's a whole suite of insights we've gotten from you all, from local boards, from Kaitiaki Forum, from advisory panels, from C40 cities, and you can see all that on the left, and that's not comprehensive. That's just a sample of the insights we've gotten over the last few months. What we're now doing is packaging this into what are the outputs? What are we hearing? And so that'll be a vision, a set of shifts or areas of focus, and a long list of actions. And we'll take that back to the working group who we've engaged yesterday. We'll take that back to you. We'll integrate things like modeling we're doing on pathways to get us to a low-carbon city. We'll take in the thinking of C40 cities, of the independent advisory group, and we'll start shortlisting. And again, this is an iteration process. So then we shortlist, we go back out to workshops with subject matter experts, with the working group, with you all, and we refine those ideas. And we've started to float the idea that what if instead of kind of going into our bunker and developing a plan and coming back and making sure we get a few thumbs up on it, we actually highlight transparently what this process looks like to those who are engaged throughout the whole way. So this is just a snapshot of the process. It's not the end and the beginning. But we're working on the idea of a climate summit at the end of October, where we highlight these ideas. At the bottom line, you could see that online platform feeding ideas into the process along the way. We work with stakeholders. We have leaders from some of those groups and CEOs who have made this commitment nationally be engaged. And that's how we kick off the drafting process of our plan, so that people have been engaged in designing the actions along the way. They've been with us for testing and iterating and refining. And I would bet that they are going to be a whole lot more interested in helping us implement this regional plan on the other end, off the map, when we actually get this signed off and done. So I'm sure I'm missing a lot of bits here. You could take any one of those boxes and you can kind of dive deeper down. But I'm just trying to paint the picture that we're trying to do a few things differently. The conversation so far has been largely positive and inclusive. There probably are things we're missing, and so we look to you for that steer and for advice on where we should focus. We will be coming back to you next month with a workshop, and maybe I'll leave it there. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Oh, fantastic. This is really nice process, John. It's fantastic, the democratising the design process. If we could get all our council consultation processes along a timeline like this and a process like this would really be rocking. Anyway, any quick questions on this? Councillor Walker.
Yeah, I mean, on the face of it, looks like a good process, John. And I guess a related question would be, have you got enough money? Have you got enough resources to do the job that's necessary?
Well, I guess thinking of that as a bit of a softball, I could answer that in two different ways. Thank you, Councillor. I think part of the story here of us at the end of this process will be going back and saying we did it on a shoestring, if I could be honest. There was no allocated funding for this. It's within existing budgets, and it's with the strength and capacity of the team behind me and actually the way they work across the organization that will get this done. Of course, a bit of support would be helpful in kind of greasing the wheels, but we're going to be doing this with existing budgets at this point.
Okay, through you, Madam Chair, I would suggest, certainly on my part, there's an interest in applying more resource to this, because certainly for me, this is the most important issue that confronts humanity, and there's a great deal of urgency around it, and I sense the potential for a great deal more engagement with the community. And I just wonder where there is the opportunity to have a conversation around lifting this further, with some options around that, Madam Chair. I also would make a related comment that I hope that we're not holding back on the influence and the suggestions that people in Auckland and conceivably elsewhere are making, so that we don't have a process, as sometimes happen, gets dumbed down, that we're really, pushing the envelope as much as we can. So a question particularly around resourcing and the opportunity for accelerating this, Madam Chair.
I can probably rescue our staff from trying to go down a bit of a political foxhole. We start the annual plan kind of process again quite soon, and I think, it's lovely to offer more support, but I think we should ask our staff what they would come and ask us for, and obviously as we redo our more detailed budgets for the next year, that's a discussion we can have with our sustainability team.
So I guess what I'm putting on the line is, I would like to see some options, some scenarios going forward to that annual plan process, so that as councillors, we've got some choices.
Yep. I'm sure that will happen. Councillor Newman and then Councillor Darby.
Thank you, John. When we had the discussion on the zero carbon bill submission, I was in the minority that voted against. A lot of the debate at the time was on concession, or in the end lack of concession for short-term emissions, because of the concern, the impact on primary industries. Given that we haven't, as by way of that submission, supported any concession for primary industry as part of a net 50% reduction in net carbon emissions by 2050, what policy work are you doing in terms of the type of concession that would be provided or recommended to be provided to that industry affected, and when will we get that information?
So I think this is part of a wider piece of work where we haven't narrowed down our focus specifically on industries yet by name. We've been to, for instance, I know the discussion last time about being to the Rural Advisory Panel, which we've been to a few times. That's where the conversation starts. I think the analysis will be on emissions and on impacts. And I think with the Rural Advisory Panel, we've had the conversation about impacts because they're well positioned, as are some of those around this table, to talk from firsthand experience about impacts to their own farms or their own agricultural industry. The emissions conversation, while it is important, and while concessions are, I suppose part of the picture here, they haven't been fleshed out because it's such a small percentage of our overall emissions as a region, at roughly 6% or something like that from agriculture, and that's not all farm. So we're trying to take the big nuts first and really crack those. Those will be around transport, land use, first. So I anticipate we will have time to get into the conversation about actions and options. However, we haven't gotten to that point with any of this yet. We will do so with agriculture as well.
Chair, when the matter was debated, we hadn't taken the submission recommendations, as I understand it, to the Rural Advisory Panel. So what I'm wanting to know is what policy discussion has taken place to inform that debate, because I understand you are precisely correct. The rural industry does not comprise the majority of emissions. It is a minority, but it is significantly affected by the change to the reduction in emissions. So where does that industry come into the conversation, given the disproportionate impact that we haven't got a concession for short-term emissions?
So I guess part of this challenge of highlighting a process that's new is starting earlier and being quite transparent about what we're doing and when, not just with you, but with the community. We haven't started even down the track of specific actions and ideas yet.
Okay, thank you.
If you'll just let me finish. So this will be part of an ongoing integrated approach that takes apart policies and ideas and incentives across all industries, including agriculture. We're just not to that process yet.
Yeah, that's clear. Councillor Darby.
Thanks, Chair. Chair, thank you for bringing this to the top of the agenda. Climate change is at the top of the agenda, and that's a good thing. I just want to acknowledge that. John, look, I generally, Chair, I agree with this direction. I think this is mapped out really well. I'm really quite excited by the way you're, getting your fingers into community in many, many ways to extract ideas and build this work. Look, one thing it's really struck me recently, the deaths in Greece, 26 people, families just embracing each other and incinerated. It's just beyond trying to imagine it. 70 deaths there all up. I'm aware of 10,000 hotspots in the Arctic. The Arctic has never had fires like this before, and it's got 10,000 hotspots. There's something like, in mid-July there were 100 wildfires in North America. 1 month later there are, no, I think it was 18. Now there's 100 big ones, and they are reporting as many as 500 in total. It's just sort of struck me, are we addressing fire as a risk? I never imagined we would be facing wildfires in New Zealand, but it is likely. It really is likely. And I'm thinking of our residents that live in rural areas and the Waitakere Ranges, and yes, New Zealand bush does burn. I grew up with the knowledge that New Zealand bush does not burn, but that is total fallacy when you have two months of drought. So my question is, we're addressing big issues like sea level rise and inundation and a whole host of other things. Are we addressing the risk of fire, and have you had some learnings about what's happening in Europe at the moment?
Yeah, no, thank you, Councillor, through the chair. So I guess just a personal anecdote, I remember being in the late 90s in the Arctic myself with one of the leading researchers on fire in the tundra, and she said, I don't think the tundra really burns, and that was in the late 90s. And when we discovered a fire that went out of control in the tundra way north of the Arctic Circle, it was this thing that she got a lot of research papers out of. So it's something that's now commonplace, and at least anecdotally, it feels like it's changed quite a bit. And of course, personally, I was at a place like Piha when it was burning and sirens were going off, what was it, last year or something. So, clearly New Zealand bush burns, and clearly this isn't just our area of investigation. We're working quite closely with the Chief Engineer's office, well, Chief Engineer and also Auckland Emergency Management, and Sarah, and a whole number of others who are thinking about this from a natural hazards point of view. Those risks include fire. So when we look at the risks and vulnerabilities across environmental, social, and economic, that is one that we need to think about, and that we're committed to doing so. We just haven't gotten all that compilation of risks and vulnerabilities assembled yet. We've previewed that with you visually at the workshop, but when it does come together, we'll take a special note to think about how we deal with fire.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
No, thank you, Councillor Darby. So it's good to get people's thinking primed, and we can bring that to the workshop. John, thank you. That was both of you. Fantastic to have that as part of our presentations and bringing one of our memos to life, really, because our memos don't do justice to the huge amount of work that happens.
Happy to move.
Now, Councillor Filipaina, as the chair of the 1080 group, I just wondered if you wanted to cover off the question of what is the process and anything else you wanted to raise in relation to that.
Okay, so with the memo that's under item 15, and I know that there wasn't 1080 sort of mentioned in it, but this memo is a response to one of our writers. So, yeah, I'm not going to go through that whole memo because you've read it, but I will, however, say that on the 17th of October, it was obviously decided that we'll go through 2018 the drop through the pest management plan at Kohunui. So part of the recommendation as well was to set up the Healthy Hunua Pest Management Political Advisory Group, which I chair. And for those that didn't know, we had our first meeting on the 8th last week. There's myself as chair, the Deputy Mayor, Councillor Cashmore, James Brown, Independent Māori Statutory Board, Malcolm Bell from the Franklin Local Board, and Councillor Greg Sayers. And attendance as well, we ended up having was Councillors Hills, Fletcher and our chair of this committee that attended. We've also had our staff there, DOC, so they're all represented. And from here, it's that particular advisory group was around the planning and implementation phases of the Kohunui pest management program. So, look, it's going ahead. We've spoken to our iwi, and in light of what was said earlier this morning with the public forum, you know, there are Ngāti Whanonga, one of the groups, there's Ngaitai ki Tāmakit, there's Ngāti Paua, and the people that we've sort of had a relationship with was the Iwi Trust, and we've taken on board what our presenter this morning has said. So, you know, there's some work that's getting done through Dean's team, Koro and Te Wakangamua in regards to what has been raised. You know, and we'll definitely report back, but Ngāti Tamaoho is the other group. So, you know, for us, our advisory group will be updated in regards to the progress of the 2018 pest management program. So, you know, Chair, it's the beginning. I obviously want to acknowledge the previous advisory group that we had when the program in 2015 was conducted. And, you know, for me, I just leave it up to the people that have been there, namely the Franklin Local Board, and Angela, the chair of the board, was there as well. So yeah, look, it's really, let's do it as per the recommendation from the 17th of October. Kia ora.
Thank you, Councillor, and I just invite any members to get in touch directly with Rachel Kelleher or Mace Ward to step you through the process for the closure of the forested area, the clean-up process, the work that's being done with local community, local landowners, neighbouring landowners, and all of the safety processes that take place, not the least of which being the partnership with Watercare and other organisations. So,
Chair, there was just, sorry, there was one thing that Carla mentioned, and that was around the Kaitiaki wardens. So, you know, and she mentioned the money's going through, and just to let everybody know, that's work that they will be leading with our other mana whenua, and Mace and his team are doing that to, you know, get them to do the mahi at Kohunui. That's, yeah, just want to let you know.
fantastic. Thank you, Councillor Filipaina. The meeting is in your good hands from there. Okay, and other questions directed around the other memos just need to be directed to the authors, and I'm sure that can be followed up. So let's move that we receive those information reports. Councillor Philippinas, happy to move.
Happy to second.
Councillor Fletcher's happy to second. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against,
Aye.
carried. Now we move back